The only reason I moved to Brookhollow Estates was because it was quiet, not because I liked the HOA. The houses were spaced out just enough to not hear your neighbor brushing their teeth, and I needed that kind of peace after 20 years as a paramedic. I thought I was done dealing with crazy people. I was wrong. My name's Callen O'Reilly. I'm 46, own my home outright, and don't take crap from anyone, especially not Wendy Fairgrove, the HOA president who thinks she's the queen of suburbia. Wendy is the kind of middle-aged woman who wears pearls to pick up her mail and writes up violation notices on her monogrammed stationery. She also has the worst habit of weaponizing the HOA rules like it's her personal Bible. I'd mostly avoided her, up until 2 weeks ago when she declared war over a satellite dish. I'd installed a new internet provider because the old one kept cutting out during my online night classes. I'm working on my emergency management degree, and I need reliable service. The new provider ran a small cable under the easement near the sidewalk, well within my legal right. Wendy, of course, flipped. I was sipping my coffee that morning when I saw her standing at the end of my driveway, arms crossed like she was modeling for a fascist home and garden catalog. She didn't knock. She just yelled, "That cable is a violation of aesthetic standards, Callen. You didn't submit a modification request." I stepped outside, mug in hand. "It's underground. What exactly are you objecting to?" "Mole traffic." She didn't laugh. "You're setting a precedent. If we let you break the rules, everyone will." I wasn't in the mood. Read the bylaws. Section 9, Paragraph 4. Utility easements are exempt from cosmetic approval. I'm legal. You're just loud. She stormed off. I figured I'd won that round. I was wrong again. 3 days later, I came home from work and nothing worked. No Wi-Fi, no online access, not even a blinking router light. I called the ISP. After 30 minutes on the phone, the tech told me the cable had been severed manually. I walked outside and followed the line to the edge of the property. It had been dug up and cut clean with garden shears. The dirt was still loose. I didn't need a security camera to know who did it. But just to be sure, I checked my neighbor Micah's doorbell cam. He's 12, obsessed with gadgets, and thinks I'm cool because I let him ride his scooter in my driveway. I asked if he saw anything weird. His mom handed me the footage. Clear as day, Wendy in a pink blouse, crouched and snipping my internet cord like she was pruning roses. I wasn't even mad yet. Not fully. That came after I saw her smug little wave to the camera. I called the cops. Officer Daniels came by, took a look at the footage and said, "Technically, this is vandalism, but you're gonna have to file a report and take it to small claims." That's when things clicked into place. Wendy thought she was untouchable. She thought she could cut my lifeline and hide behind HOA rules. But if she wanted to play dirty, I could get filthy. The next morning, I grabbed my tool bag and walked over to her meter box. I'd done years of emergency home repairs in the field and knew exactly how to disable the external power safely. I didn't damage a thing. I just unplugged the meter, locked the housing with a contractor-grade padlock, and taped an envelope to it. Inside was a handwritten invoice. Access fee for unauthorized entry to private utility easement, $1,200. Due immediately. Payment delays incurred daily interest. I signed it with my full name and stuck a printed clause from the Civil Code about trespass and interference with private utilities. I also included a thumb drive with the video footage. By noon, she was screaming on my porch, "You can't do this. This is illegal. I demand you reconnect my power." I stayed calm. "You cut my internet. That's a federal offense. I didn't destroy anything of yours. I simply removed access to an area you're no longer welcome in. It's HOA jurisdiction." I leaned against the doorframe. "Then sue me. But if you want our lights back today, pay the fee." She stomped away, muttering something about lawsuits and calling the board. I didn't hear from her again until that night when I got an email from the HOA declaring an emergency board meeting to discuss Unauthorized tampering with utility infrastructure. I showed up with copies of the footage, the invoice, and a copy of the local ordinance that made her little gardening stunt a misdemeanor. There were 7 people on the board, all of them handpicked by Wendy. Most of them barely looked up from their papers when I walked in. Wendy sat at the head of the table, her face tight like someone had just told her Botox wasn't covered by insurance. "Callen," she said, all formal. "You've been accused of tampering with another resident's utilities. How do you plead?" I dropped the flash drive on the table. "Play that first." Wendy opened her mouth to object, but one of the board members, Tony, who I'd helped fix a leaky pipe last winter, grabbed it and plugged it into his laptop. The room went quiet as they watched Wendy clip my cable like she was harvesting tulips. Tony looked up. "Is this real?" I nodded. "Time-stamped." "Also, I filed a police report. Officer Daniels has a copy." Another board member, Janice, I think, turned to Wendy. "Did you seriously do this?" Wendy stammered. "It's an eyesore. He violated the neighborhood charter." I answered that one. The charter doesn't override state law. And I didn't damage her utilities, I just secured my own property from further criminal interference. There was a long silence. Then Tony asked, "So you're saying you just unplugged it? Didn't even scratch the paint?" Wendy was losing it. "He's extorting me." I pulled out another envelope. "Here's the itemized list of damages: new cable installation, lost work hours, and the cost of the padlock. The access fee is standard for unauthorized entry into a secured easement. I'm happy to write off the interest if she pays in the next 48 hours. Janice rubbed her temples. "This is insane." Tony looked at Wendy. "You can't keep dragging the HOA into personal vendettas, Wendy. This is the 3rd complaint in 2 months." Wendy stood up. "You're all against me." No one answered. I stood, nodded once, and walked out. The next morning, she paid. But that was just the beginning. Wendy paid the access fee in full, sliding the envelope under my door like it might bite her if she touched it too long. No note, no apology, just crisp bills and a tense silence that lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th morning, I opened my mailbox and found a violation notice that looked different from the usual boilerplate trash the HOA sent. This one had gold foil lettering on the header and smelled faintly of lavender. Notice of Community Compliance Review. It read, with my name in bold letters and no fewer than 6 bullet points underneath, accusing me of everything from unauthorized landscaping to failure to maintain uniform mailbox height. I stared at it for a while, then walked inside and dialed a number I hadn't used in a few years. "Lance, it's Callen. You still doing code enforcement consulting?" He chuckled.
"Yeah.
You finally get tired of pretending your HOA isn't a cult. I need someone who knows how to dissect a bylaw like a frog in biology class." "You in? You paying in beer or actual money?" "Both. I'll explain when you get here." Lance showed up that evening, wearing the same Hawaiian shirt he wore to court the day he beat a city inspector in front of a judge. He used to work for the county zoning office before he quit to freelance as a consultant for people suing HOAs. The man had a talent for finding contradictions in rulebooks most people didn't even know existed. He took one look at the violation notice and laughed. "She's trying to write you up for mailbox height? That's federal. HOA can't touch it unless yours was made out of antlers or something. Mine's factory standard. So she's fishing." "Big net," I said, handing him a folder. "I've been collecting these." Inside were copies of every letter, email, and door flyer Wendy had ever distributed, along with a few anonymous complaints I'd gotten from neighbors who were too scared to speak up but too annoyed to stay quiet.
Lance whistled.
"She's been busy." This one says a kid's sidewalk chalk was aesthetic graffiti. Who writes like that? Someone who thinks fun is a zoning violation. He spread the papers across my dining table, scanning them with the focus of a man who enjoyed legal minutiae way too much. "You know," he said, tapping one of the older notices, This one contradicts the updated exterior paint guidelines from last January. If she distributed that after the amendment, she's enforcing outdated rules. She rewrote them herself, claimed it was a clerical error. Lance raised an eyebrow. You got the amended version? Yup. Dated and notarized. He leaned back. Then we have leverage. If she's enforcing rejected rules, we can file a formal complaint with the state HOA regulatory board. That's not small potatoes, Callen. That's a full audit. Think they'll take it seriously? Depends. You want to make it serious? I nodded. The next morning, I started knocking on doors. Not everyone wanted to talk. Some peeked through curtains and pretended not to hear me. But others, like Mr. Benson, the retired machinist who lived 2 houses down, invited me in, poured me burnt coffee, and showed me a stack of fines he'd paid over the last year. His crime? Installing motion lights over his garage. They said it disrupted the historic lighting aesthetic, he said, shaking his head. This neighborhood was built in the 90s. What history? I took photos of the fines and thanked him. By noon, I had 12 different testimonies. Lance helped me organize them into a clean report, complete with dates, photos, and a color-coded chart of rule inconsistencies. We printed 5 copies and hand-delivered one to the HOA board secretary, who looked like she wanted to drop it into a shredder. 2 days later, during a rare public board meeting, Wendy tried to get ahead of the backlash. We're here to discuss the growing trend of noncompliance in our community, she began, standing at the front of the clubhouse in a pastel pantsuit that looked like it had been ironed with rage. Certain individuals have been spreading misinformation and attempting to undermine the integrity of the HOA. I didn't wait for her to finish. I submitted a formal complaint to the State Oversight Board, I said, rising from my chair. And I have documentation of at least 15 rule violations committed by this board, including enforcement of outdated codes and unauthorized fines. Gasps rippled through the room. For once, people were listening. Wendy's eyes narrowed. That complaint is frivolous. It has no legal standing. Tony, the same board member who'd stood up for me about the video footage, cleared his throat. I read the report, he said calmly. There are contradictions we can't ignore. I think we need to vote on a temporary freeze on all new violations until a third-party review is completed. You don't have the authority, Wendy started. Tony cut her off. Actually, we do. Section 2, Article 7. Emergency Procedures for Administrative Review. You signed it. The vote passed 4-3. Wendy stormed out before the meeting ended. That night, I got an anonymous email with an attachment labeled Annual Budget Internal Use Only. No message, no sender. Just a spreadsheet. I opened it. In the past year, the HOA had spent over $30,000 on consulting fees paid to a company called Fairgrove Community Solutions, LLC. I didn't need a detective to figure out who owned that. Wendy had been funneling HOA money into her own pocket through a shell consulting firm. I showed it to Lance. He whistled low. This is fraud. You bring this to the board, it's game over. Not yet, I said. I want to make sure she can't weasel out. I went to Micah's mom, Mrs. Tran, and asked if she'd be willing to speak at the next meeting. She hesitated at first, but when I showed her how the HOA had charged her a fine for overgrown grass during the same month the landscaping budget was mysteriously depleted, she agreed. We spent the week gathering more evidence. By the time the next board meeting rolled around, we had a binder 2 inches thick and a lineup of neighbors ready to speak. The meeting was packed. People stood in the back, whispering and pointing. Wendy looked like she hadn't slept in days. I stood up first. This community's been misled, I said. Our dues are being siphoned into a private entity owned by the HOA president. Here are the financial records. I handed the binder to Tony. He flipped through it, growing paler with every page. Then Mrs. Tran stepped forward. I was fined for grass height during a time I was out of town caring for my father, she said. There was no courtesy notice, no warning. Just a bill. I asked where the landscaping crew was supposed to be, and no one could answer. Mr. Benson followed. They charged me for lights that weren't even visible from the street. I paid it because I didn't want trouble. Each testimony added weight to the room. You could feel the mood shift from curiosity to anger. Finally, Tony stood. I moved to suspend Wendy Fairgrove from her role as HOA president pending a full investigation into financial misconduct. The vote was unanimous. Wendy didn't say a word. She simply stood, grabbed her folder, and walked out. No one stopped her. Outside, the night was quiet. I stood under the porch light, watching neighbors shake hands and talk like they hadn't in years. Maybe it was the shared relief, or the realization that the tyrant had finally lost her crown. Lance clapped me on the back. You know, he said, you could run for the board now. People would vote for you. I shook my head. I don't want to run it, I said. I just wanted to stop running over people. He grinned. Mission accomplished. But I wasn't done yet. Not until I made sure Wendy couldn't pull this stunt in another neighborhood. The week after Wendy's removal was calm, eerily so. No glossy notices on doors, no mysterious fines, no early morning lawn inspections. For the first time since I moved into Brookhollow, I could brew coffee without wondering what passive-aggressive nonsense would be taped to my mailbox. But I knew silence didn't mean surrender. Wendy wasn't the type to retreat quietly. And sure enough, her next move came in the form of a crisp envelope delivered by certified mail. The letter inside was from a local law firm, Sturgis and Dell, embossed in silver. It accused me of retaliatory utility disruption, civil harassment, and emotional distress resulting in reputational damage. It demanded $5,000 in damages and a written apology. No mention of the video footage, of course. Just a threat wrapped in legalese. I drove straight to my friend Sonia's office downtown. She ran a boutique legal practice and owed me a favor after I helped her daughter prep for EMT training. She read the letter once, then tossed it onto her cluttered desk. This is fluff, she said. Not a case. No court's going to side with someone who is caught on camera committing property damage. She's hoping I'll fold before it goes anywhere. Sonia leaned back in her chair. You want to respond officially?
No.
I want to make sure she can't escalate this quietly again. I want it public. Then you need a paper trail. And you need to file first. She helped me draft a formal complaint to the County Mediation Board, citing harassment, malicious interference with utilities, and abuse of authority under the HOA's charter. We attached the video, the invoice, the financial documents from her shell company, and signed statements from the neighbors who'd spoken at the meeting. It was more than enough to trigger a review hearing. The date was set for the following Tuesday at the County Civic Center. It wasn't a courtroom, but it might as well have been. Long tables, a panel of 3 neutral mediators, and rows of seats filled with residents from Brookhollow who had clearly taken the day off just to see what would happen next. Wendy showed up 10 minutes late, dressed in charcoal gray with a man trailing behind her who looked like he hadn't blinked in weeks. I guessed he was the Dell from the letterhead. He didn't carry a briefcase, just a thin folio, and a face like he was smelling spoiled milk. The mediator in the middle, a woman named Marjorie with a librarian's glasses and a judge's tone, opened the session. We're here today to address the complaint filed by Callen O'Reilly against former HOA President Wendy Fairgrove regarding allegations of misconduct and retaliation. Both parties will be heard. Dell stood first. My client was acting in accordance with her duties as a community standards officer. The incident in question was a misunderstanding that has since been resolved financially. The retaliatory actions taken by Mr. O'Reilly, however, were excessive, disproportionate, and constitute harassment. Marjorie nodded without comment, then turned to me. I kept it short. I have video evidence of Ms. Fairgrove trespassing and cutting a private utility line. I have documentation of her profiting from HOA funds through a company bearing her name. I filed a police report the day it happened. I secured my property without damaging hers. I responded to a criminal act with a lawful one. I handed over copies of everything. Dell tried to object, but Marjorie held up a hand. We will review the materials. You'll have a chance to respond after. The footage played on a small screen. No one moved. When it ended, Marjorie flipped through the financial documents, her expression unreadable. Ms. Fairgrove, she said, were you aware of the conflict of interest regarding the vendor you selected for HOA consulting services? Wendy twisted in her seat. Those services were approved by the board. Tony, sitting in the audience, stood. She presented the company as a third-party consultant. None of us knew it was registered under her name until Mr. O'Reilly brought the documents. Marjorie looked back at Wendy. Are you denying ownership of Fairgrove Community Solutions, LLC? Wendy's mouth opened, then closed. Dell leaned in and whispered something. She gave a clipped nod. No further comment, she muttered. That's when Marjorie dropped the real bomb. Based on this evidence, we are recommending a full audit of Brookhollow Estates HOA by the Regional Oversight Committee. Additionally, Ms. Fairgrove is barred from holding any position of fiduciary responsibility in any HOA within the county for a period of 5 years. Wendy's chair creaked violently as she stood. This is politically motivated. He has a vendetta against me. Marjorie didn't blink. You may file an appeal, but today's recommendation will stand pending review. The hearing adjourned. Wendy stormed out. Dell trailed behind, already pulling out his phone. I stayed behind to answer a few questions from the mediators. When I finally stepped outside, a small group of residents had gathered near the parking lot, murmuring quietly. Mr. Benson was there. So was Mrs. Tran. Even Micah's mom, who usually avoided public scenes, had shown up with a thermos of something that smelled like peppermint tea. They didn't say much, just nodded at me and walked off together. 2 days later, a flyer went up on the community bulletin board by the clubhouse. Special election for interim HOA president open forum. Below it was a handwritten note from Tony. Let's do it right this time. I didn't run. I nominated Mrs. Tran instead. She won unanimously. Under her leadership, the board repealed 6 arbitrary rules, refunded improperly issued fines, and hired an independent auditor to scrub the books clean. They even changed the mailbox key policy so people could use any standard lock, not just the overpriced ones Wendy's cousin used to sell at marked up rates. As for me, I finally finished my capstone project for emergency management certification. Used Brookhollow as my case study. Titled it Community Resilience Through Individual Accountability. Sonia read the first draft and laughed. You're going to get invited to speak at conferences. I just wanted working internet, I said. She raised an eyebrow. You unplugged a power meter, launched a financial audit, and dismantled a corrupt HOA. That's not just anything. I shrugged. Sometimes, the only way to fix a broken system is to make sure it can't operate in the dark. A week later, I got a letter from the County Oversight Committee. The state had flagged Fairgrove Community Solutions, LLC for irregular tax filings. They were launching their own investigation. I didn't need to follow up. I knew how that would go. Wendy sold her house within 3 months. Rumor had it she moved to a gated community 2 counties south. One with no HOA. Brookhollow didn't throw a party when she left. But someone did leave a plastic garden mole on the curb the morning after the moving truck pulled away. It wore a tiny pink blouse and held a pair of toy scissors. No one claimed it. I left it there for a week. Then Micah asked if he could use it in his science fair diorama. Something about predator-prey dynamics. I told him it was perfect. After all, nothing eats up a neighborhood faster than unchecked authority. But nothing fixes it faster than people who stop waiting for permission to do the right thing. And thanks to one snipped cable, a locked meter, and a community that finally woke up, Brookhollow was better than it had ever been. The first Saturday after Wendy moved out, I slept in until almost 9.
No barking en plans.
No passive-aggressive clipboards looming over my hedges. Just the quiet hum of sprinklers and the smell of someone grilling breakfast sausage a few houses over. For the first time in months, the neighborhood felt like what it was supposed to be. Home. I thought that would be the end of it, but people kept showing up at my door. First was a guy named Eric from the next street over. Tall, lean, wore a faded mechanic's shirt with his name stitched on the front. He had a nervous energy like he was used to getting shut down or ignored. He stood on my porch, shifting his weight. "You're the guy who took down Wendy, right?" I opened the door wider.
Come in.
He stayed standing in my kitchen while I poured coffee. "My wife and we've been here 6 years. Paid every fee, followed every rule. But last year, Wendy fined us $400 over a shed. Said it was non-compliant. I emailed the board and never heard back." "Did she issue it through the HOA?" I asked, sliding him a mug. He nodded. "Stamped and signed. But when I checked the records after she left, there was no mention of it anywhere." "You still have the notice?" He reached into his back pocket and unfolded a creased letter. The header matched Wendy's custom stationery, but the signature at the bottom wasn't hers. It was someone named E. Blackwell. The HOA had never had anyone by that name. "She made up a fake inspector," I said, examining it. Eric blinked. "You serious?" She was running her own little racket. Probably figured most people wouldn't dig deeper. He looked like he was ready to punch a wall. "We paid that out of our savings. I had to cancel my daughter's birthday trip because of this." I handed the letter back. "Put in a retroactive claim with the new board. They've got a relief fund now. And bring the letter to the auditor. If it's not in the books, it's fraud. They'll flag it." He nodded slowly. "You ever think about running for something? You're good at this." I shook my head. "I just want things to make sense. That's all." He left with a lighter step than he came in. The next visitor came later that week. Her name was Dr. Felicia Monroe, a pediatric pulmonologist who lived 2 blocks over. She was dressed like she'd just come off a hospital shift, scrubs, tired eyes, and a big manila folder clutched in her arm. She got straight to the point. "I've got something you need to see." She laid the folder on my coffee table and flipped it open. Inside were property maps. Not just of Brookhollow, but of the adjacent cul-de-sac that had been under dispute for over a year. The HOA had claimed it fell under their jurisdiction, even though it hadn't been developed at the same time. It was newer, with different street names and no mention of HOA fees in the deeds. "They tried to annex our block last year," she said. "Said the original development plan included us and that we'd been grandfathered in. But the county records say otherwise." She showed me a surveyor's report, dated 4 years ago, confirming her street wasn't part of Brookhollow Estates and never had been. Wendy tried to fine my neighbor for parking across his own driveway. Same kind of nonsense you dealt with. Only he's a single dad with a disabled kid. She threatened liens. He almost paid. "You've already got the proof," I said. "Why come to me?" "Because you know how to make the noise people actually hear. I'm a doctor, not a fighter."
But you?
"You know how to burn out the rot." I leaned back and studied the maps. "You want the HOA to rescind the annexation. I want them to put it in writing that we were never part of it. And I want them to refund every fee they extracted under false pretenses." I nodded. "You'll need more than your street. If we can prove they altered HOA boundaries without unanimous consent from the board and affected homeowners, it's illegal. I've already got 2 affidavits from previous board members. Both say they never approved the annexation. One's willing to testify. Then we bring it to the county registrar. If they rule in your favor, it becomes public record. The HOA has to comply." She smiled, the first real one since she walked in. I knew coming here wasn't a mistake. We filed the complaint the next morning. It took 2 weeks, but the county sided with us. The HOA had no legal claim to her street. Every fine, every fee, every mailed threat was invalid. Dr. Monroe's neighbors pooled together to hire a small claims attorney. The HOA cut them a settlement check before it ever reached a courtroom. No one said Wendy's name during the board meeting where the reversal was read aloud. But everyone thought it. That same night, I finally took down the old security camera I'd installed because of her. Left it boxed in the garage collecting dust. I didn't need it anymore. A few evenings later, I was on my porch sanding down a cedar planter box when Tony dropped by. He didn't knock. Just leaned against the railing with a bottle of cider in one hand and a lopsided grin. "You made the news," he said. I looked up. What? Local paper. Page 3. Community overthrows HOA tyranny. Not your name, but they quoted the hearing and mentioned the audit. I wiped my hands on my jeans. Guess we're famous now. He took a sip. Felicia's planning a block party. First one in 5 years. Said you're required to attend. I raised an eyebrow. That's so. She said she'd make those spicy deviled eggs you liked at the meeting. I hesitated. All right. I'm in. He exhaled, then looked out across the yard. You know, I joined the board because I thought it would be a good way to meet people. But for a long time, it just felt like I was part of something hollow. Like I was co-signing control disguised as order. You weren't the problem, Tony. I didn't stop it either. You did when it counted. He nodded. Still. I think we owe it to the community to make sure no one like Wendy ever gets that kind of unchecked power again. You working on something? We're rewriting the bylaws, adding term limits, capping discretionary spending, and we're setting up a resident oversight committee, 5 rotating members from the neighborhood, none of them board affiliated. I whistled. That's ambitious. We figured if anyone complains, we'll just tell them to take it up with the guy who unplugged a power meter and lived to tell the tale. That made me laugh. The block party was the following Saturday. Kids ran through sprinklers. Someone set up a dunk tank with a sign that said Board Member Splash Zone. Mrs. Tran brought spring rolls. Dr. Monroe wore sunglasses and a Not My HOA t-shirt. Even Mr. Benson turned up with a cooler full of root beer and a stack of lawn games he hadn't dusted off in years. For the first time since I moved in, people weren't just living next to each other. They were living with each other. Toward the end of the night, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and the air cooled, Micah ran up with a cardboard box. "You forgot this," he said, grinning. It was the plastic mole, the one with the pink blouse and toy scissors. I took it, turned it over in my hands. "You know," I said, "I think it's time she retired." He looked confused. "Where's she going?" I pointed to the planter box. "Right there. She can guard the basil." He nodded solemnly. "Good. Plants need protection." I stuck the mole in the soil, angled just slightly toward the walkway. A silent reminder of what we'd been through and what we'd built in its place. Tony raised a toast later that night. "No speeches, no pump." Just a quiet, grateful cheer. "To good neighbors," he said. And for once, everyone knew exactly what that meant.